One fine day, a lady came to meet a young man. The young man looked intently at the lady and greeted her at the same moment. The slightest doubt remained that not everything was as usual in this place. The young man grinned and told the lady that she had returned home late. She sighed and stated that it was so, and asked what brought him to her, while the young man slowly reached for his weapon. He said that he heard a very interesting story, so he decided to see for himself, thinking that his Adele would never do such a thing. He turned around and said with a fierce grin that she had always exceeded his expectations. Looking at the lady, he declared that it was truly a miracle that his father and brother had not yet been accused of treason. He saw that she had prepared carefully, so he wanted to know who she wanted to shoot with the gun. Gray pointed the gun at the lady, and she knew that he was the youngest scoundrel of the Volonic family, who had painted her whole life with the color of revenge. She said that this was her end, and then the young man asked if she had any last words. She didn't answer, because she knew that's how it had to end. Some time ago, a young man tenderly asked Adele if she loved him. Now he looked at her menacingly and demanded that she answer him. Gray stated that if she had something to say, she should speak up immediately. She sighed and stated that she had nothing to say to him. He wanted her not to be like that and to tell him immediately. Then he looked at her with fury and declared that she must tell him that she loved him. Adele looked at him intently and with a cold expression on her face, declared that she had never experienced anything like this. He looked at her with a smirk and declared with fury that in the end she had simply used him. A few seconds later, the sun rose and blinded Gray. Adele realized that this was her chance for salvation. Then she rushed towards him with lightning speed, as she wanted to snatch the weapon. She managed to do something similar, and at the same time struck him with the hilt of the weapon with fury. Adele pointed the gun at the young man. He sighed heavily and stated that she was, as always, cruel. Adele looked at him intently and asked her to understand. He said that he understood her, but still, if she wanted to solve everything, she should have shot faster. Gray looked at her intently and, holding his weapon, declared that it would be an honor for him to die by her hand. Adele looked at the young man hesitantly. She recalled their meeting and how he helped her. It remembered how he looked at her with tenderness. Adele also recalled their moments together, when she was genuinely happy. Adele looked at him intently and declared that she shouldn't have done it, but she really loved him. With bitterness in her voice, she declared that even now she still loved him so much that she hated herself for it. Asking for forgiveness, she said goodbye to him, and then a loud shot rang out. Some time ago, Summer wrote to her sister and begged her for salvation. To her regret, she had recently learned that the Duke had killed her brother, and Gray was only her instrument of revenge. Several years ago, a young man greeted his girlfriend with a joyful smile. He looked at her intently and stated that she had arrived early. Adele said that she came as soon as she finished her business. Looking at her friend, she thanked him with a smile for his service. He smiled and said that her request was not so difficult, and besides, he had managed to see her in a wonderful outfit. She smiled and asked if the dress suited her, and Mensha admiringly declared that it did. Adele knew that today, in such an establishment, namely the best social club in the kingdom, she would meet Gray. She wanted to see the elegant libertine who was famous at the club. The Full Moon Club, the finest social club in the kingdom, of course. She was a complete stranger to him. If she had been accustomed to such luxury and endless entertainment, she would not have been called an evil crow. Because of her shabby bag, black dress, black shoes, black hair, and black glasses, she was always teased and ridiculed. The young people mocked her and said that she was like a crow, dressed in black from head to toe. And yet, despite the ridicule, she graduated from the academy as one of the best. It was then that she met Mensha on her way and became a successful court clerk. She fought desperately for her place in the sun. Adele knew that the local aristocrats didn't care about her. She knew that this was no reason to be shy. Mensha, having looked around the situation, said that the club had been different before. They saw that the club was full of debauchery. The lady assumed that everything had changed in the club with the appearance of Lord Gray. The young man stated that he does not visit such places. He said it was most likely the influence of the prince and his friends, who often went to Halleck to visit, warming up while studying. It was said that the young man had bet his entire fortune with the Crown Prince of Halleck. Gray had a knack for bold speeches that balanced on the edge of what was permissible, and he had a sensitive beauty that captivated women. He was a daring libertine of high society, and yet he was the youngest son of a duke. She wasn't interested in the playboy, the heir to the Nora, since he was looking for a personal assistant. She understood that this was her chance. Mensha told his friend with a smile that they needed to find the head of the welfare department, as he knew she wanted to transfer there. He said that he decided to introduce her to a man. She was shocked, because she knew that she didn't need it. He was worried that she might leave, but the lady stated that she would not go anywhere. He said with a smile that he was glad to hear something like that, since he didn't want to give her to anyone. A few minutes later, the young people saw a man on their way, who greeted them with a smile. The young man asked his friend who he came with. The young man turned his close attention to the new visitors. Mensha asked his friend in surprise why she froze. She sighed and said that nothing serious had happened. After some time, she sat quietly at the table, catching the glances of all the guests present. The young man asked her what kind of glasses she had, and mockingly asked if she had really taken them from the dragonfly. Everyone present mockingly asked if she could see anything through the dark glass. She was furious, but said she was fine and had seen everything perfectly. Gray looked closely at the lady as he saw that she took the blow with fortitude. Adele's eyes should be red, like everyone in the Baron's family, but she had pink eyes. She knew that no one should see them. In the kingdom, imposture among the nobility was called treason. A young man declared that his girlfriend was allergic to light, and that it was harmful for her to be without glasses. She knew now was not the time to be distracted by such things, but she could hear all the whispers. Adele looked closely at the young man, knowing that now was the time to talk about the assistant position. A moment later, she was taken aback as a young man approached her and greeted her with a smile. Gray said with a smile that she had nice glasses. Everyone present turned around at that moment and looked at them in bewilderment. Adele thanked him, but she was puzzled and did not understand what was wrong with him. Gray, looking at the lady, declared that they suited her very well. He saw her snow-white skin, black hair, and regretted that he could not see her beautiful eyes. He stated that he had often seen such ones in the kingdom, but they were all in a gold frame. This was the first time he had seen a silver one. Then everyone took up his speech and began to praise her beautiful glasses. Adele looked intently at the young man and stated that she would like to talk to him. But he ignored her and started talking to another person. Adele was puzzled because he first attracted everyone's attention to her and then made her feel awkward. Now she saw that he was openly and brazenly ignoring her. Adele realized that he had made it clear to everyone around her that they could ignore her. She realized that he was perfectly aware of the fact that he had complete control over the atmosphere in the room. For some time she watched him and his guests intently. The young man asked his companion with a smile if he wanted to go to the beach. Gray, in turn, said with a grin that he can't stand beaches. After a moment, she understood his nature and realized that with his words and looks, he was showing that she should not get closer to him. Adele decided to get some fresh air and so hurried to her friend. Even she realized that everything was for the best, because she didn't even have time to talk about the assistant position. She didn't have time to approach her comrade when she suddenly heard a scream from him. He was shocked because his childhood friend was drowning. Mensha was furious, as he had expected her to get into trouble. Adele hastened to stop her friend, as he wanted to help his friend, since she was completely naked. And this could cause strange rumors. He didn't know what they should do in this situation, while Gray watched them. She knew that men would not lift a finger for fear of having their reputations tarnished, and the ladies were trained in etiquette and would not do such a thing. Adele looked at everyone present with fury, as she hated this place. She knew that if she interfered, they would think the commoner was trying to curry favor, but she knew she couldn't just leave the situation like that. Then the lady decided that even though she would become a laughingstock, she had to save the girl. As she left, she told her friend that he should stay put. Gray glanced sideways at what was happening, as he found the spectacle amusing. Then the young man looked at Gray in surprise and asked what he intended to do. Gray said with a smile that sometimes you can be a fighter for justice. A few minutes later, the lady dived into the water, but became furious because the girl did not listen to her at all. She was puzzled because she didn't know what to do. She quickly swam up to the boat and tried to push it towards the girl, but the note turned out to be heavier. After a few minutes of trying, she felt relief as the boat moved. She shouted to her friend to lick up immediately. At the same time, the girl burst into bitter tears, because she couldn't do it. Adele heard words of gratitude, but she wanted the girl to get out of the water as soon as possible. She didn't even have time to climb into the boat when she felt that something was wrong. She realized that she was entangled in a net. Adele was puzzled, as her strength was already running out. Meanwhile, Gray was rushing to their rescue. After some time, he was already near the girls, and he noticed that everyone was safe. Adele was puzzled and said that this wouldn't work. She quickly took the cape and wrapped it around her friend. After some time, the girl was finally in the boat. The young people turned around as they heard some noise, and then they saw a crowd of onlookers. Gray smiled and offered his hand to the lady and asked why she was not getting out of the water. She was taken aback and said that her leg was stuck in the nets. Adele knew she had to get out, but to her regret, she lost all her strength to save the girl and a moment later plunged into the water. Gray dived under the water without thinking twice, as he wanted to help the girl. He quickly approached her, as he saw that the situation was very serious. Adele opened her eyes, but as soon as she did, she was immediately shocked because he kissed her. A few seconds later, the lady was already above the water, and she was very excited. Gray sighed and declared that it was all over, and she supported him. Then he said that he knew it. She looked at him in bewilderment, because she did not understand what he was talking about. As the lady swam closer to the boat, she stood frozen in shock as she saw that he was holding her glasses. Adele stood frozen in a daze, not knowing what to do. Then the young man grabbed her hand and mockingly declared that her eyes might pop out in surprise. Trembling with fear, she thanked him, but at the same time, she felt a fear that consumed her. Because, for a commoner to pretend to be a nobleman is a grave crime, and the price for it is life. She knew that not only she, but also her closest relatives could die, but she didn't know what to do, because he didn't say anything. Gray looked at her with a smirk and stated that he knew there was a reason for wearing those glasses. She didn't know what to do. He said that she seemed to have a reason that couldn't be discussed. Adele stated that the color changed on its own with age. He said, with a grin, that he had heard of something similar, and it was nothing more than a congenital feature. She said it wasn't true, and she didn't know the reason, but they were red, and then they changed, and that's true. The young man stated that she didn't need to try, since he wasn't interested. He stated that he knew people who lived difficult lives, and that life was a burden for them. Looking into the distance, he declared that since they needed to get to the shore, they needed to go get oars. Adele asked in surprise what kind of burden they were talking about. He turned around and casually stated that he couldn't stand unnecessary trouble. She looked after him with bewilderment, because she did not understand why he had looked at her so intently then. She saw that he had seen everything he wanted, and now he was telling her to her face that he was disgusted. She knew whether it was disgusting or not, but she didn't care, because his family were very strange and unpleasant people. Adele looked closely at the boy and asked him to look after his little sister. He sighed heavily and asked if she was going to get some medicine. Adele said that it was so because they had no other choice. She ran for the medicine, but at the same time, she looked back to avoid unnecessary trouble. After some time, she finally got into the house, but to my regret, I fell very hard and hit myself, but I managed to hold back a scream. She walked around searching for some time, as she knew that the medicine was nearby. Her search was successful, and she found precious rib fat. The boy, holding back the urge to vomit, told his sister that the smell made him sick. She said that he should be patient, because things would get easier for them soon. He was puzzled because the neighbors were throwing stones at them because of the war. Adele asked him what was more important to him, not having stones thrown at him, or that they could get at least a little sleep. He said he wanted to sleep, and then she said he should be patient. The next day the boy screamed and called for his sister. After some time, they ran into the house. Adele was in shock. She saw the girl shaking, and she asked her to come to her senses. She was taken aback and froze in shock when she saw the overturned cauldron. Adele was shocked because she saw that her little sister had eaten fish oil. She couldn't stand it and screamed, but after a few minutes she came to her senses and asked her sister for forgiveness. She strictly forbade her to eat fat, but she still felt guilty about it and asked for forgiveness. She knew perfectly well that it was just a dream, but it still hurt her a lot. It was a dream that she could never change, and at the same time, she asked her sister for forgiveness for not being able to save her. Early in the morning, the young lady woke up with her pillow soaked through with bitter tears, but at that very moment she came to her senses, as she was furious and understood that she had to avenge her family. She walked to the window and read a sample of the bulletin. She knew that she had to go to the port and have the documents printed, because she needed money. because revenge is an expensive pleasure. Early in the morning, a young lady came to the port and greeted Hawk, but at that very moment, she froze as she saw the young man. She looked at him in bewilderment, as she had not expected to see him at all. Hawk looked at the young man in surprise as he greeted him. He was very surprised and did not expect to see Gray, but he still greeted him. Hawk said with a smile that he had heard that Gray was driving the whole world crazy these days. Gray stated that he would very much like to get his hands on Hawk's house. Hawk told his interlocutor that he should stay away from Valois, as he was ruining his reputation day after day. Hawk claimed that he had been telling traders on the mainland that the Gray had been hanging out in dubious taverns. Hawk asked the young man if he was not going to marry, since he knew that ladies did not like men with a bad reputation. Gray said with a grin that with a face like that, no matter what he did, ladies couldn't hate him. Hawk said that it was better for him to pretend that he didn't know Valois, and Gray asked if he should act like that. The man said that having a very beautiful face can sometimes become a curse, but while he is young, he does not understand this. Gray smiled and asked if he really meant to say that his face would bring him trouble. Hawk stated that the young man does not particularly like women, since he has not even slept with anyone. Gray became furious and asked the man who he thought he was, but the man simply stated that he was just a narcissistic idiot. Hawk said that one day his lies and pretty face would play a cruel joke on him. Hawk said he was blinded by complacency and couldn't see true value, and such fools always came to a bad end. The young man couldn't resist and burst out laughing. He looked closely at his comrade and declared that he had the eye of diamond. He smiled and said that he had no experience with women and that it was even for the best, because he would look like an innocent gentleman. Hawk told the young man that he had better trust his instincts. He also said that he would not sell his plot of land. Gray said, with a smile, that he had not come today for this, but in a week they could talk. Gray noticed the small article and noticed that it was full of information that sailors needed. He looked at the man in surprise and asked who Eddie was. Hawk asked the young man with a joyful smile if he was really interested. He knew that reliable information is always valuable, and it is a force capable of controlling people, and not everyone is capable of gaining such trust. Weather, tide times, prices of goods in ports, places where pirates operated, collecting various rumors and turning them into reliable information is hellish work. He wanted to know who this man really was, so he wondered if he was a local who knew the sea like the back of his hand. But he understood that a sailor or a captain would have done it better, or that this was a small project of the heir of a rich trading guild, who had money and people. Hawk asked with a smile if the young man was really curious. He said he was, and with that his business went much easier. Hawk said that Edom could have been a little boy, but Grace said that simply couldn't be true. After a while, their conversation died down as they saw a lady enter the tavern. Adele looked at the young man in surprise, as she did not expect to see him in such a place. Adele was taken aback, but quickly came to her senses, as the boy called her with a smile. He asked if she had come to see him, but the lady said that she had come for money. He was upset, as he wanted her to come to him. Gray looked sideways at them and their animated conversation. Adele asked the boy why he was so affectionate today. He wanted her to buy him an apple pie. She said he could have asked Hawk to cook something, but the boy said his food wasn't tasty and he charged money for it. Adele said that all pleasures come at a price, because she even paid him, and she knew that he saved up well. Luan didn't deny it, but he still wanted to eat something tasty. Adele looked at the boy intently and declared that he should spend his money wisely. She also said that she had previously asked him not to call her Eddie in public. The boy was taken aback and asked for forgiveness. The men stared at the sweet scene. A moment later, Adele approached the man and greeted him. She said she knew all the tax notices had been delivered, but asked if he had anything else to declare. Hawk looked at the girl with a puzzled expression and asked if she could speak without formality. She said that she was on duty. At that moment, Grace looked at the lady with a satisfied smile and greeted her, and also stated that they met again. Then Adele greeted the young man. Adele asked the man if he had prepared the amount they had agreed on. He said it was robbery, but she assured him that it was not so. Gray began to talk about the messenger and praise her, but she did not pay any attention to his words. Hawk sighed and said that he would give her the money. Gray smiled and said she had been a bit cheap with the information. He wanted to talk to her, but the lady said she was on duty. Then he asked whether a court clerk was allowed to engage in commerce, For example, publish a newsletter. She said the chief treasurer and the head of the department were busy with family matters. Gray said they were in the business of managing the property, not publishing the newspaper, and she said she didn't run the newspaper herself either. She assured him that she was only managing the process, so she saw no difference with her boss. At that moment, he declared that he now understood why Hawk had shuddered. He asked when she would finish her service. Gray said he would like to have a few words with her, and it was a very important conversation. At that very moment he smiled and said that it would be better for them to talk without witnesses. Hawk was taken aback, as he wanted to hear the very beginning of the conversation. Once outside, the young man said that he would like the girl to post something in the newsletter, but she immediately refused. He didn't expect such a categorical refusal, but he didn't expect immediate consent either. He hoped that they would at least negotiate, because that was the impression she gave. A woman who deliberately spoke harshly and coldly to keep harsh men in check. She pretended to be icy, but she was sensual. A woman who turned to stone when her weaknesses were revealed. He knew she acted special, but deep down she was a good person. Even though she pretended not to care, she actually had a good soul. Simply put, she was a proud woman who lived a miserable life. He smiled and stated that she should listen to him because she could change her mind. Adele said that there was no need for that. She stated that he was the type of person whose information should not be published in her herald. She said her column was only for sailors. He was puzzled because he couldn't convince her, so he gave up. He sighed because he couldn't become a sailor overnight. She was furious because he was bullying her. She wanted to know what he was doing in the port that morning. Gray stated that now only threats remained. He asked if she had permission from the palace to publish the newspaper. She said that permission was only required for mass circulation or publication, but her newsletter was distributed only in this shop, so this did not apply to her. It published only information that was useful to merchant ships and had nothing to do with politics. He wondered what would happen if the sailors conspired to establish a trade blockade against the kingdom. Gray asked if she had put in place protections against such malicious actions. Adele asked if he wanted to declare her messenger a source of lies and confusion. She was furious because she saw that he was threatening her. He stated that her messenger could not be accurate, and she herself knew this perfectly well. He asked if she was willing to take responsibility for the damage that would arise from a minor mistake. Adele stated that she understood perfectly well how much he needed her messenger, but she firmly stated that his wish was not destined to come true. Gray asked with a grin if she was serious. He came closer to her and said that they could keep things simple. But at that very moment, she pushed him away and declared that she would not take this easy path. It didn't matter to her whether the messenger was being ruined by someone's dirty manipulations or whether she herself published a lie at someone's behest. The result for her would be the same. As she left, she declared that she would not publish a lie, and the difference was only in time. If the messenger was destined to die anyway, and she would rather refuse and save her face. He asked in surprise why she was being dramatic. She said that he is not a sailor and dreams of hope, freedom, and even life itself. They put everything on the line when they set sail. For this reason, she had to be careful. She knew that the messenger was only an aid to her main work. To ensure that sailors returned safely to port with their goods and paid duties on time, without delay and in full, that is what she did. Adele also claimed that he offered her a ridiculous price. She immediately announced with a smile that her messenger would be bought for a lot of money. Some time later, the young man, sitting by the shore, was resting and thinking about his conversation with Adele. He asked with a grin if she really took him for a fool. She stated that this was not the case at all, but she also wondered if she would dare to tease the heir of Walleneck. She said she just didn't like his proposal. He was surprised. She bowed and said that she very much hoped he understood her. Now he realized that she was a very tough nut to crack. Gray understood that she was paying attention to him. A moment later, he saw the ship and turned his close attention to it. He hurried to his comrade and asked if the coffee they were drinking had come from the yeoman's ship. Hawk stated that this was so, and he also asked if the young man really wanted to get into coffee. Gray said that coffee was very aromatic, expensive, and rare, and not easy to obtain. Hawk turned his attention to the ship owner. Gray wanted to put together a team for him, but when he heard that he already had a team, he decided to go a different route. After some time, he left the room in confusion, as it was very cramped. He was furious because his plan wasn't working. At the same time, he did not feel very well and his head was spinning. He remembered the most terrible moment of his life. One late night, the maid woke up the young master. He woke up and looked at her in bewilderment, but she only stated that he needed to run immediately. He was taken aback and asked if his sister had had another attack. She stated that this was true, and this time everything was very serious. At that very moment, he pulled away from his nanny. He shouted that she should leave quickly. As he ran away, he declared that he had to stay and that she had to leave first. Then he hid in the room. But a few minutes later, he heard a loud sound. He was stunned and froze in place when he saw his sister. She looked at him with a smirk and stated that she knew perfectly well that he had been in such a place. With tears in her eyes, Anna screamed that he was the devil's spawn. A moment later, she grabbed him by the neck and held a sharp object to his face. After a few minutes, he came to his senses, but he felt fear spreading throughout his entire body. He turned around hastily because he felt someone hugging him, but he realized where he was. Not for a moment did he push the girl away and angrily asked what she was doing. The young lady did not pay any attention to this, and at that very moment, she came up to him and hugged him. She saw that his gaze was directed in another direction, so she asked if he liked this girl more. She said with a grin that it was very annoying because the lady was not interested in him at all. She said that he could have fun with her, but then she asked if it was true that he didn't like women. He was furious, and without wasting a minute, he pushed her away. Gray shouted for her to leave immediately, but at that very moment, he felt pain throughout his body. The man told Gray that he needed to go to the meeting room. After all, the prince will be unhappy if he is late. Gray knew this was impossible, but he agreed anyway. He was also informed that Knox had become head of the palace chancery. Entering the hall, he saw the prince, who was calling him to him. Harold I, Prince of the Kingdom of Charles. As he passed by those present, he noticed that they were sleeping from boredom. He didn't want to attend such an event, but still he had no choice. At that very moment, he looked at the young man and noticed that he had grown up. Even before he left the estate, his brother brought Knox. He was an orphan who was suddenly brought home from an orphanage by his brother. He was unhappy that he was given little land, but was suddenly ordered to sponsor some unknown guy. But he liked the result, so he agreed with his father's statement. But at the same time, he saw that the meeting had turned into a farce. But then he noticed that the young lady was watching everything closely. Gray was surprised by this. At the same time, he wondered if the lady really wanted to compete in concentration. He wanted to see how long it would last. He understood that this was strange, because if she had been interested in the report, she would have written down at least something. Looking at the prince, he noticed that he was not even listening to the report. He realized that she was looking specifically at the young man. Gray was puzzled because he didn't know how to interpret her look. After all, she looked at him as if he were empty space, and she didn't even deign to pay him any attention. He was taken aback as he saw that their eyes met, and she looked at the young man with a tender smile. He realized what kind of taste she had. Sometime later, the prince told the young man that he could look around, but he had business to attend to. Gray said he just had some business to attend to in the West Wing. The prince was surprised and did not know what he needed from the administration. He had one unresolved matter, and he wanted to take care of it. Looking around, he saw that the central palace was full of gold. A few minutes later, he entered the office and greeted Manhwa. The young man was extremely surprised. He asked Gray how he came to them. Gray said he wanted to ask about the meeting and take a look at the office. Manhwa asked Gray if he had paid for Knox's education, and the hero stated that he had. Manhwa said the young man had matured. Gray said he felt like a father raising a son. Manhwa was puzzled as he knew that there was a small age difference between them. Gray stated that he gave birth to him with his heart, which makes him even more precious to him. At the same time, he watched the lady and realized that she was not at all good at hiding her emotions. A moment later, he announced that it was time for him to go. Manhwa was surprised and asked if he should be accompanied. Gray smiled and declared that he did not need a male guide, so he asked his comrade to get on with his work. Manhwa said that he was doing well as is, and Gray asked in surprise if he was sure of his words. Manhwa said with surprise that this was so. Gray stated that they were now asking the one who cannot lie. He asked if he could speak to his assistant alone. She looked at him in surprise, and he asked her with a smile what she thought about it. He asked her what she thought about what Knox had said in the boardroom. She was shocked and didn't understand why he was asking her something like that. She wondered if he had figured out their connection. Then he saw the ointment on her table and asked if she was injured. Adele stated that she was healthy. She got out the ointment for the knocks, and if he hadn't been avoiding her, she would have given it to him long ago. Adele asked if he really wanted to ask her about something else. He smiled and stated that it was so, because it seemed to him that she knew Knox well. At that very moment, she said that it was not about him. Grace smiled and stated that it was so. After some time, he asked her how about Togo completely handing over the rights to the messenger to him. He stated that he would pay her 2 years' income from the Herald in advance. Gray said it was a great deal for a newspaper with an uncertain future, but she declined. He said with a smile that this was the expected answer. At that very moment, he said he was hiring her. She asked him in bewilderment what he was talking about. He wanted to hire her as his personal assistant. She was shocked, wondering if it was really that simple. But she knew she shouldn't agree right away. At that very moment, he began to tell her about all the benefits of the job. But she refused, and this only once piqued his interest. He also stated that her office would be located in his mansion. After all, he was moving his office from the city to the family mansion. She understood that there was no better way to gather incriminating evidence on the family than to have free access to their home. She wanted to know why they took her brother and sister, to expose their human trafficking slavery, to legal auctions. She asked if he was talking about the main estate. Gray stated that this was the case. Then he said with a smile that he would accept her answer as a sign of consent. As soon as she agreed, he immediately disappeared with a smile. She didn't understand why he called her to the hotel at a late hour, but she knew she had to listen to him and then just leave. Entering the room, she saw a young man calling her. He said with a smile that she should look over the documents. The young man introduced himself and stated that he was Gray's assistant, but in the future, they would become colleagues. Dorian said that his personal office was still in the hotel, so they met here. He apologized that she understood it wrongly. After some time, she was familiarizing herself with the business contract. He stated that their main condition was the full transfer of property rights, and they would discuss the remaining points later. The young man looked at the lady with a satisfied smile, as he liked everything. Dorian gave her the materials regarding her characteristics after taking office. He smiled and asked if she had any questions. Adele said she had no questions as they had prepared everything well. He stated that as soon as she was free from work, she could use her free time as she wished. Gray said that he did not care about her work. He stated that she had to prove her worth to their house. He also asked her to be careful, because the Duke was a very complex person. Gray stated that since they were already finished, it was time for him to leave. She asked if Gray was always so persistent when hiring someone. Dorian asked her whether she thought this was true or not. She said she didn't know because she couldn't understand what was on his mind. Dorian said that his master was indeed a peculiar man, but otherwise they would get along well. The next day, Adele arrived at the mansion. She knew she had to collect as much evidence as possible. Adele knew that from now on she had to be extremely careful and act quickly. Gray smiled and announced that the lady had arrived, remarking that he had excellent taste. Gray asked his subordinates if he hadn't given her a pass. Dorian was taken aback and declared that he had forgotten to put it in the envelope when he gave it to him. Meanwhile, the young lady was arguing with the guards because she couldn't get through. But a moment later, she saw a young gentleman who greeted her with a smile. He smiled and said that he was sure she would come. He also asked for forgiveness, as there was a small mistake. Adele sighed because she knew he hardly did it on purpose. He said that they had not been to the capital's mansion for a long time. As he walked home, he asked for forgiveness and declared that it would not happen again. She was surprised that he explained the situation to her seriously. She also stated that Dorian does a great job. One said she hadn't expected everything to happen so quickly, from the office move to the handover of the Herald. Gray smiled and stated that his subordinate was talented, but he didn't like that he was taking credit for his work. She looked at him in surprise, but he stated that he had done everything himself. Looking at his companion, he said that if he takes on a task, he sees it through to the end. She was a little cheeky in response, but he said that she should be nice to him because she was his assistant. Gray stated that they were now working together and they should start trusting each other. He smiled and said that maybe he was more capable than he seemed at first glance, but she didn't answer him. 2 years later, the Duke looked menacingly at the girl and declared that she should not have done something like that. She did not agree with his words, and at the same time she was furious. At that very moment, she began to prove to him that she was right. Even though Gray was her boss, she had to prove her worth to the Duke. no matter how arrogant and picky he may be. She tried her best to prove herself. At the same time, she knew that she didn't need to panic, because she was confident in her actions. She said that in the end, he was satisfied. Not only the Duke would remain, but also His Highness. He declared it was a brilliant plan, but at the same moment, he looked at his son. He asked his son if he hadn't said that the right to hold the exhibition had passed to the Count. She was taken aback in a way she hadn't expected. The young man smiled and stated that it was so. She was furious because she had never known anything like this. Gray said that the plan was excellent and they should talk to His Highness. The Duke could not bear it and shouted angrily at his son. Thunderstorm revealed that if the other nobles saw this, they would choose them. He began to tell who the Count would invite to appease His Highness. The Duke angrily shouted at his son to watch his words. He yelled at our son and told him to have a normal attitude towards work. The Duke declared that if he did not do this, he would send him to the estate. Gray declared that this was too much, but he didn't understand what to do in the wilderness. Gray claimed that his share of the land was insignificant. After all, everything except a patch of land belonged to his brother. He said that if his father gave him everything, he would go and live quietly there. He smiled and stated that he knew how to behave quietly. The Duke was furious, so he asked his son if he could manage a rich and secure estate like his brother. Gray was furious and smilingly told his father not to compare him to his brother, since his brother had lived almost twice as long as him. He said with a smile that he didn't need abilities, because his assistant had them. The Duke was furious, so he quickly sent his son out of the office. They left the office, and at that very moment, the young man called the lady. Adele stated that they had finished the work so everyone could do their own thing. He asked her if she was angry, but she said she wasn't. She knew it wasn't the first time he had done this. The experience of recent years had taught her not to succumb to the bully's tricks. She simply wanted to ignore him. At that very moment, he asked how it was possible to throw away an important document. She sternly stated that she had already asked him more than once to convey the Duke's orders without fail. He smiled and stated that the old man had talked a lot, and he had simply forgotten to mention the Count. At that very moment, she asked him to give her the document, but he began to mock her. She was furious and didn't understand what he was doing. Gray said he was hurt that she did not accept the apology. She screamed for him to give her the documents, but he smiled and said that he didn't want to do it. Adele asked if he really wanted to make her even more angry. At that moment, he tenderly took her hand and declared that he had already apologized. She was furious with herself because she had fallen for his smile again. She always thought of people as pathetic, people who melted at his smile. But now she was that person. He looked at her with a smile and said that in just a little while she would get the document. At that very moment, Adele was overcome by the spicy smell from him and all the documents flew apart. She knew she was falling, but he managed to catch her. He said with a smile that she had lost and would have to sign the documents again. She had added a clause to the contract about abstaining from sexual contact, so she wanted him to adhere to it. Gray stated that he didn't mean anything like that, because he was just helping her. Moments later, they saw a young man. Knox bowed and greeted the young master, and the Gray man greeted him in return. Gray asked with bewilderment why he was here now and not in the castle. Knox stated that he had come to deliver a message to the Duke, and Gray, with a grin, said that he had heard that the young man had received another marriage proposal. He said with a smile that he was jealous, and Knox asked with bewilderment what exactly he was jealous of. Gray said with a sly smile that the girl was a beauty, and they said that she was good-looking, not only in her face. Knox said he didn't understand what the gentleman was getting at, and in any case, he had no plans to meet her. Gray looked at the girl with bewilderment as he understood that she was too calm to be Knox's beloved. Adele asked the young man if he had already had lunch. He said that he was in a hurry, and that's why he didn't do it. He irritably declared that he would continue his business and eat after the report. Adele bowed and wished him bon appétit, and also informed him that it was time for her to go. Gray looked at the girl with bewilderment, as she was worried whether the young man had eaten or not while he was getting ready to meet another. The Duke of Beef told the young man that they had arranged an engagement for him, and he must behave with dignity in front of the Count's family. Knox was puzzled and did not understand why he was given the engagement. He understood that they still thought that his only support was the surname they had given him, and at his age, he had already become the head of the palace chancellery. Even if we put aside his position, for everyone he is the son of a count. Although he was given a title, he was Walenek's cousin, a member of a noble family, and he did not understand why they were trying to bring him into contact with the aristocracy. Looking at the young man, Gray asked if he considered himself handsome. Gray stated that he was not asking if he was actually handsome, but rather if he considered himself handsome. Gray asked him with a grin if he could feel the difference. Knox, looking at the young man, stated that he did not consider himself such. He was puzzled because he knew that the day had been truly terrible. A moment later, he saw his sister and realized that she had decided to finish him off, but he didn't understand what she was doing there. Meanwhile, the lady sat quietly under the tree and hummed a song. He came closer to her and declared that she should stop singing. He asked what if someone heard her. She stated that no one but them knew this song, and yet it was her way of getting through to him. At that very moment, the lady presented him with a sandwich and declared that he should have a snack. He knew it wasn't just politeness. It was like a parent caring for a hungry child. After all, before they were parents, children, and friends to each other. He was furious and didn't bring up the point of all this now if their sister was already dead. He accepted her sandwich, but was still furious and did not understand why she had come to him. Adele also gave him some ointment, and they said that it removed the marks of frostbite. He shouted angrily at her to stop doing this and to leave this house if she was really thinking about him. She screamed that he knew perfectly well why she worked here. He screamed that he knew and therefore wanted her to finish it already. She grows up and asks if he really wants to say that he didn't care. He said that it was so and asked her to stop. She was furious, and because she knew he was with her sister when she died. At that very moment, she handed him the ointment and asked him to calm down. Adele sighed heavily and hurried away. Knox shouted and said that they needed to stop this. He said that he didn't want her in the house. Adele sighed and asked him to take care of himself. At that very moment, the young man grabbed her hand and stopped her. He sighed and said that his words would sound crazy, but he asked if she really liked Gray. Adele was shocked by his question. Knox asked angrily why she allowed him to cling to her. Adele screamed that he was hitting on a lot of women, but not all women were in love with him. He sighed heavily and stated that she did not know herself at all. He also stated that the young man would soon get married. She looked at him in surprise, as she didn't expect to hear something like that. Knox told his sister that the daughter of the Grand Duke was marrying Gray, but she did not understand why her brother had grown up so evil. She sighed heavily, because she understood that she shouldn't judge him, because something else was important to her right now. After some time, she left her office. She knew that when there was no one in the mansion, it was the best time to stroll through other people's offices. She glanced through the letters, but she knew that she should look for something else. Then she climbed to the secret drawer, but she could not open it with the master key. Then she climbed toward the heavy artillery. She managed to find the unknown letters, but then she heard a noise outside the door. Adele was shocked because she realized that the butler was going into the office, but she knew that she needed to hide. Moments later, the men entered the office. The lady was puzzled because she did not understand why she felt so cramped behind the curtain. But after a moment, she realized what the problem was. She fidgeted and at that very moment stumbled, but the young man managed to catch her. Gray smiled and stated that they had been seeing each other a lot lately, but he noted that she needed to be careful. She wanted him to let her go, but he gestured for her to be quiet. She silently prayed to the butler not to open the letterbox. But moments later, she opened her eyes because she heard the master's voice tenderly telling her to breathe. She was shocked because he was fidgeting, and in doing so, he could open them. After a few minutes, they realized that they were alone in the office. The young lady jumped back from the young gentleman with lightning speed. He looked at her intently and declared that he had no idea that she had such a hobby. She was taken aback and wondered what was wrong with his hand. But then she realized that she had hurt him. Adele ran up to the young gentleman and asked if everything was okay with him. She didn't understand why he was silent, because he should have told her at least something. He said that it was more important that the curtain didn't move. Gray smiled and stated that the view was great. She was taken aback and asked what he was talking about. He said with a grin that her legs were very beautiful. The young lady was shocked by his statement. He said with a smile that he would be the first to leave, since he was the first to arrive. She was shocked and asked if he would really just leave. Gray asked if she was sorry he was leaving. He came closer to her and asked if she really wanted them to continue having fun in such a place. She was furious, wondering if he couldn't have expressed himself differently. Gray said it was time for them to leave, so as not to leave any evidence. He stated that they needed to leave separately. Then she stopped him and asked him what he was doing in the office before she arrived. He looked at her menacingly and declared that he had only a good opinion of her, since she lacked the spirit of fair play. Gray looked at her intently and menacingly and declared that he had not asked her anything, so she should do the same. He asked her if she was working on his hand. He said with a grin that he would wait for her at his place. Adele knew she had to put all thoughts aside, as he still looked more suspicious. After a moment, she realized that his voice was strangely quiet. He smiled and declared that he was glad to see her, at which point the lady asked where Dorian was. Gray claimed he had sent him away and had no tact at all, so he was always disturbing their privacy. A moment later, she began to treat the wound. She had thought the young gentleman was just a playboy, but now she saw that he knew a surprising amount. She understood that he was pretending to be a softie, but she was actually used to pain. The young man asked the lady with a smile what she was thinking about. He didn't understand why she was staring at him, and therefore wondered if he really thought he was handsome. She sighed and stated that he was probably in pain. He felt strange because he didn't like it when someone touched him, but now he didn't feel anything like that. A few minutes ago, he stood in a cramped room, realizing that he needed to see who had come and leave. But then he saw a lady who was creeping into the room in a strange way. He asked her if she was having a hard time. Adele asked in surprise what exactly he was talking about. He stated that she never took off her glasses, even when they were not alone. Adele said that she was fine. He understood that if that was the case, then he could do something similar. A moment later, he took off her glasses, and she didn't like it. The young man recoiled and asked if he really shouldn't do something like that. A moment later, he said that she should be careful in the future, because it might not be him, but someone else. She was surprised, but he stated that what he said about her figure was absolutely true. A moment later, their conversation was interrupted as Dorian burst into their room. Dorian looked at his friend with a smile and declared that he had seen something interesting. Dorian, surprised, declared that the young man's hand looked like a beehive, returned and declared that some bee had decided to fry in the same place. The young lady looked at them puzzled as they talked about the bee. After the conversation, Gray became furious and stated that his comrade was asking for trouble. Dorian told the lady with a smile that he would treat her to the best honey, but she immediately refused. Gray asked the lady in surprise if she really liked such flat jokes. She stated that it was time for her to leave, so they could talk freely. A moment later, the young man announced that they needed to change all the locks on the rooms, as he suspected that his Adele was dishonest. Dorian looked at him in bewilderment as he did not understand what he was talking about. At the same moment, he asked if Adele had been rummaging through their things, and Gray stated that nothing important was missing. He wasn't that well off. Dorian knew they had to be careful, so he asked what kind of lock they needed to install. Gray said that they needed to install a lock that even sailors couldn't open. Dorian was surprised because she had fallen for the degenerate, and she behaved surprisingly calmly and confidently. Gray stated that they shouldn't worry. Dorian sighed and asked his friend not to be so careless. Dorian asked his friend if he was okay, and if his identity was revealed. Gray smiled and asked if he had anything to hide. Dorian knew Klimt Hauer from the North Sea Trading Company, a northern magnate and rich man, owner of a trading guild, who set the tone for aristocratic fashion and was earning fabulous money right now. This was another name of Gray, which he hid. Gray smiled and declared that his friend was getting too excited. Dorian stated that the lady should have known about it. Gray said they needed to find out more about her. He knew that too many strange things had happened today, because today he had been in a confined space and nothing had happened. Dorian was surprised, as he knew that the young man could not stand being crowded. Gray also suspected Adele and Knox, as she thought there was something between them. Hudson entered the room and greeted the young man. Hudson looked at him closely and said that he had brought him something. He also asked if he felt dizzy after donating blood. Knox claimed he was fine, but asked the man what business he had come for. A moment later, they started talking about business. Knox said, with a smile, that there was nothing to worry about. Hudson was the Duke's eldest son and heir to the duchy, and he also had 2 sick children. The son's condition improved, and he moved to the capital, but the daughter's condition worsened every day. Since he was torn between the estate and the capital, someone was needed who would be with Scott at all times. At Scott's request, the Earl adopted him from his playmate, and thus began his life in the capital. And this playmate from the official legend was Knox. In reality, he was a disposable item whose disappearance no one would notice. They were madmen who used the blood of orphans as medicine. Scott greeted his dearest comrade with a smile. A moment later, Scott thanked his friend for the medicine. Unfortunately, he knew that his sister was having a hard time right now, as she had had an attack. He stated that the blood of the child they found did not match her this time. Scott knew that his sister was the only one who matched her. He sighed heavily and wondered why there were no more like them. He learned that if his sister had lived a little longer, Catherine would not have suffered. Knox was furious. He understood that he had to endure it only because of this. He was still alive. If he broke down, he would simply disappear just like those children. Knox asked for forgiveness and called the young man. At that very moment, he announced that he would not be able to donate blood next week. He said that the CEO's birthday was coming soon and he would have to go to a banquet. And since he was a big fan of drinking, he would have to drink with him, and it would take at least a week for the blood to clear. Scott asked in surprise if he needed to go there. Knox stated that the general manager did not like him, and it was not so easy for an ordinary clerk without connections to refuse. He understood that he was noble and was proud of it, but he still decided to remain silent. The young man was furious and shouted at his friend to continue. Scott glared at his friend and asked who dared to ignore him. Knox quietly informed his comrade that he had received a marriage proposal from the Countess, and he thought that this was the matter. Scott said he had heard about it, but he wondered if that was the problem. Knox stated that the Earl's family was not allowed into the Central Council, and that becoming the son-in-law of such a house meant forgetting about promotion. Scott understood everything. Knox said that's why they want to remove him. Knox apologized to his friend because he felt bad, and he was burdening him with his problems. Scott said it just hurt him to hear that his friend was having problems. Knox said with a smile that he had simply forgotten his place, and that the marriage did not depend on him. He said that he had only upset his friend. Scott told his friend that he didn't need to worry. He looked intently at his comrade and declared that he would definitely talk to his father. Scott told his friend that he simply couldn't live without him. Knox was seething with rage and anger, but still held himself back. He understood that he needed to use it to the last. No matter how disgusting it was to him, he wanted to finish me like his sister. The next day, the young man greeted his girlfriend with a smile. She smiled and bowed, greeting him back. Dorian stated that she was early today, while Adele said that the lunchtime was set especially for her. He said that this was true because she had quickly run away from work, but now he invited her to have dinner with her boss. He looked at her intently and asked if she had heard the news. He stated that Grand Duchess Charlotte would arrive soon. Adele said that she heard about it. He asked if she had any questions. Adele said that this was the master's personal matter, and that it did not concern him. He said that everyone in the house was on edge, wondering if there would be a new mistress in the house, but he stated that Ogre had a right to be offended. She knew that the young master and marriage were incompatible things. Dorian smiled and asked if she really didn't care. Adele said that she didn't understand what he was talking about. Dorian smiled and said that if the gentleman went on his honeymoon, they would have a holiday. She said with a smile that his master would certainly take him with him. He did not understand how she could say such terrible things calmly. She said it was true, and at that very moment he fell to the ground. He hoped she was lying to him. A moment later, she asked if the gentleman really was planning to get married. Dorian smiled and asked if she was interested. She knew that since he was so eager to tell her everything, she could play along with him a little. He stated that it seemed the matter was settled. This time the Grand Duke and his daughter were coming to visit them. The Grand Duke visited them for the first time. Doreen stated that Gray and the princess dated, but then broke up, although they remained on good terms. Adele asked in surprise whether they had parted on good terms or whether anyone had even stopped them. Dorian said she was a complete zero when it came to romance, saying that love only grew stronger when faced with obstacles. With them, everything is the opposite, because everyone blessed them and pushed them towards each other. He stated that they broke up, and that was the end of their fairy tale. At that very moment, the young man came up to me and sang closer. He looked at her more closely and started talking about her eyes. A moment later, a young gentleman entered their room and tied them up. At the same time, he was puzzled and did not understand what was going on at all. The young people quickly came to their senses and greeted the young gentleman. Gray looked menacingly at his friend and immediately fixed his hair. Grace said, with a smile, that he looked handsome, so he couldn't help but kick him in the leg. Dorian was in shock. He didn't know what came over his friend, but he asked him not to do something like that again. A few minutes later, they were talking about the weather and the terrible cold. Doreen wanted to know why she needed the extra trouble. She said she just wanted to check if the imported fertilizers had spoiled the soil, as it would be problematic during the height of the season, so she was going in winter. He was worried because it was deadly cold in the winter, so he asked the young master not to send her to such a place. Gray was extremely surprised by such a statement. He was shocked and said that his friend was a tyrant because the girl had increased his harvest several times and he was sending her into exile. Gray asked the lady with a smile if he was really bad. She stated that this was not the case and that the winter supply budget needed to be checked. She would feel better if she saw everything with her own eyes. She understood that perhaps she could find out more about her sister's death there. Dorian stated that she was still a good helper. He smiled, very interested in whether she would like to join him as assistant. Gray said he had contradicted himself, but he was serious. Gray stated that the young man had just been screaming and being bullied by his tyrant, and that he wanted to take the girl to a place where it was even colder. Adele looked at the piece of unfamiliar bread in surprise, but at the same time she listened to their conversation. Dorian told his friend that if he wanted to play the part of a good boss, he must first study the tastes of his subordinates. He said that Adele loved croissants, so he brought them. Gray quietly told the lady to try what he had given her first. She looked at him in surprise, and then he declared that he had tried the bread, and it tasted very tender and delicious. He smiled and said that she should try at least a piece. A moment later, the lady tried it and realized that the bread tasted very good. Dorian did not understand why his master was making such a show. He looked at the young man with bewilderment, as he did not understand what had bitten him, since he was also treating the lady to delicious dishes. Dorian didn't understand why he spoiled the girl and took care of her. Dorian wondered, when he had become so caring. But in turn, he also wondered if the Gray even understood what he was doing. He knew he had to be sure of his conclusions. Then he asked if they were behaving like this. Why didn't they have lunch together? Gray smiled and said that they couldn't have lunch without him. Gray asked his friend if he was jealous. He said that he loved him very much. Dorian was designated with similar words. Gray smiled and asked his friend if he was upset. He said that they would also bring him more meat. Dorian was puzzled because his friend had initially ignored him, but now he cared about him. Adele didn't understand why they behaved this way over some nonsense. She saw that they were arguing with each other, so she continued eating without interfering in their conversation. Moments later, her fork fell, and the young gentleman declared that he would pick it up himself. She did not understand why he would do that. Dorian understood that his comrade was clearly pretending to be a fool. At that very moment, the eel crawled under the table to get her fork. But he turned his attention to her legs and remembered when she took out the needles. He was a little puzzled, as it seemed to him as if he had returned to his teenage years. A moment later, he gave her the fork and damaged it. "Be a little careful." Adele was taken aback and thanked him. After some time, she left the estate and went outside. A moment later, she turned around because she heard someone's voice. The lady looked at her with a smile and asked if she was Gray's new assistant. The young lady quickly ran up to Adele with a smile, took her hands, and said that she was very pleased to meet her. She said that having a woman as a personal assistant was impressive. Charlotte stated that she had heard a lot about her, and Adele remarked that the girl looked exactly like the one in the portrait. At that very moment, she bowed and greeted the lady, and also introduced herself. Charlotte smiled and stated that Anna wanted to meet Adele. Charlotte said that the lady did her job well. Adele was surprised. A moment later, the princess approached them and stated that everyone in the kingdom knew that Adele was competent. They heard of all her merits and therefore did not cease to praise her dignity. Adele listened to them but did not answer. A moment later, she realized that she was the odd one out and needed to leave. She stated that she had not done anything special and that it was just her immediate job, but she was grateful that they treated her favorably, and then she stated that it was time for her to go. Charlotte said, with a smile, that Gray had an amazing eye for people. The ladies looked at her intently and continued to praise her. They bombarded her with questions. No lady answered them coldly and declared that she was busy with her time. But she knew that if she answered like that, she would get into trouble. so she bowed politely and said that it was time for her to go. Charlotte came closer to her and squeezed her hand. Adele did not understand why the girl did this, but a moment later they saw Gray, who was talking with the Grand Duke. They continued their conversation, but suddenly the Duke saw a lady. He came closer to them and greeted them. Gray looked at the lady in surprise and asked what she was doing in such a place. He knew he had to go and greet the people, but at that very moment, the young lady stumbled and fell right into his arms. Gray was taken aback for a moment and felt sick. But a moment later, he came to his senses, and Charlotte, with a smile, asked for forgiveness for her confusion. Adele looked at them with puzzlement, since recently the Gray Man had been courting her, and now he was courting another lady. At that very moment, Adele announced that the time for her previous meeting had come, so it was time for her to leave. She bowed and declared that she was very glad that Lady Charlotte was safe. She apologized for her rudeness and left at that very moment. She understood that just because unfamiliar things were approaching, there was no need to be surprised or embarrassed. She knew she had already lit the fire, and she needed to finish it and make sure she stepped on it like a burning ember. After some time, Adele came to Menchie. Adele walked into the room and saw her friend moping around because he just wanted to show off and call her his subordinate. Menchie said that if he had known that the Gray would steal it so cleverly, he would have hidden it more securely. Menchie asked whether he should consider the costs of risk-sharing maintenance as ship management costs. Adele stated that he should just accept it, and also asked what they could do if times were going this way. He always skillfully asked if she really trusted Klimt Tower. He declared that the young man was a northern swindler who simply wanted to play with money. The young lady could not stand it any longer and began to bombard him with questions, as well as assertions that Klimtu was not a fraud at all. She smiled and asked why he didn't start treating the amalgamation fee as a deductible operating expense and give it a tax break. Menchie, looking at his friend, declared that she was the one who increased the number of people in the risk group. Adele was puzzled because she realized that Charlotte knew about it too. A month ago, she asked Gray in surprise if he had really made a good deal. She didn't understand why he had done that. He asked if she recognized Talion, his friend whom she saw during the full moon, and Gray stated that his father, the Marquis, had invested his entire fortune in this deal. She didn't understand what this had to do with buying a ruined bargain. He smiled and stated that if the family was going broke, he couldn't just sit back and watch his friend lose everything. She said she should understand that. She was furious because she knew it was very noble of him. He stated that he had no qualms about doing charity work, as it was the largest trading guild on the continent, and right now they could buy it for very little of its original price. She understood his words but still burned with rage. Adele looked at him intently and asked what he would do with the shares now that he had spent more than half of his fortune on them. He turned around and asked if 30% was really such a big problem. She asked him if he didn't understand that the good price included debts. She asked him many more questions, but they still remained unanswered. At that very moment, she declared that this time she would definitely achieve that she would be removed from the family register. He smiled and stated that she understood everything, even without his instructions. So I didn't have to worry about anything. She was screaming that she missed his latest adventure. Just think that the membership fee was essentially his bar tab. She shouted that this was a very strange combination of sea risks from last time. At that very moment, she realized something and began to mutter some words under her breath. Without wasting a minute, she asked to let her look at the contracts. He looked at her with bewilderment, as he did not understand why she needed them. She found an interesting lead, but they only smiled and said that they knew little about contracts. She was furious, but she couldn't do anything. Gray said with a smile that after everything that had happened, she couldn't even look at him, so they stopped talking about such things. She praised him for doing a great job, but to her regret, she did not inspect the product he signed. She assumed that the latter had read the documents and they should be in her room. And a moment later, she shouted that she would return to them soon. She ran into the room for the document and remembered all the moments from this document. Dorian looked closely at his friend and asked him what he was actually going to do with the good deal. Looking at his friend, he stated that they should look at all this from a long-term perspective, and yet Adele was right. As expected, the risk pooling gets a sluggish reaction from Carlo. But still, they would need a Carlo in their range of activity sooner or later. He understood that there had to be more ways to combine trading operations. and this is a good chance for them to do it all again. After some time, the lady read the documents and said that they refused to force the trading company to compensate for the ships that had lost their circling. Dorian didn't know if it was possible. Gray knew there was always a chance. And frankly speaking, he really wanted to do it. After all, it was all his own money, and he was the one who led the hero. He understood that they could buy a good deal and pay the damages. Their value as the trading infrastructure they needed most in Carlo was worth it. He assumed they could get more out of it. He intended to get a good deal for a small percentage, and his opponent would pay all the damages. And even if the total amount of payments was the same, they would get an excellent example. The lady stated that public opinion about the guild is a reputation that is difficult to buy with money. Adele said that trade in the northern city expanded until Carlo, with the full moon, and was now carried out through the pooling of brotherly risks. She understood that the nightlife in high society and the trade of the kingdom were two different things. She said, looking at everyone present, that they needed one big move to make a good impression on people. She stated that they need to get rid of the image of a scammer so when they make a profit. He stated that there was one point for which he did not do it. She said that even if they were mullets here, they had no reason to compensate from their point of view. She asked the young people to look at the terms of the contract, to have, regardless of the cause or scale, all losses incurred by the said vessels during maritime trade will be fully covered. He looked at her with immense surprise, as he realized that she was telling him about the terms of the contract that he had missed. The young man was extremely interested in all the conditions, but in turn, he understood that this was a gamble. Dorian looked at her friend with a smile and replied that he was enjoying it comfortably, like that. At the same time, Adele said that with such points, they would certainly win a lot of money. She continued to tell them confidently about her assumptions and intentions with a smile, but a moment later she froze in place, as she saw that her companion had stood up and was approaching her at night. A moment later, she looked at him in bewilderment as Gray simply walked up and began to pull her face in different directions, thus mocking her. Because of his cheerful mood, he happily made fun of her. As she had hoped, the position of Northern Heian on the central continent had changed, as the northern swindlers, who had no real presence, were now a thing of the past. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was glad that today she again managed to turn everything out in the best possible way. She froze for a moment and remembered their conversation, and at that very moment she realized that the young man had indeed received a good luck talisman. A moment later, all her thoughts disappeared as she heard a familiar voice. Some time ago, the young man was told that Adele had been trying to reach a decision with the director today, and at the same time, everyone was in a tense mood. He was informed that all negotiations would soon end. Knox, in turn, understood perfectly well that the video would soon be gone. Looking at the weather outside the window, he sighed heavily and realized that his sister did not take an umbrella, as she had been like that since childhood. Brothers and sisters have always been stubborn in their own way, but unfortunately for her, her stubbornness is theirs, her younger brother and sister. She looked at them in bewilderment and asked if they were really frogs. She didn't understand why they ran out into the street every time it rained. Knox said with a smile that it was fun and refreshing. She knew that this was not the case at all, and they were very cold. He knew she always turned down the fun, and I preferred the cramped and stuffy arrival in damp weather. He always knew that he needed proof that she truly loved them and valued him. Even if they were like a burden to her, she always stayed by their side and took care of them no matter what. There were times when she would turn on them, but then he knew she would never let them go. He wanted to make sure of it, even in this way. Knox, in turn, was now wondering if it was strange that he now wanted her to back away from him a little. He gave her his umbrella, and the lady asked him how he would get home without it. He stated that he could handle it and that she did not need to worry about him, but the lady was puzzled because she had not seen anything. At that very moment, he took off her glasses, and at that very moment, he threw his jacket over her shoulders. She forced him for a moment, as she did not expect such a thing. She was surprised and asked what he was doing now, but he was now completely ignoring her. He sighed heavily and stated that she had finally done it. She looked at him in bewilderment, as she did not understand what he was talking about. Knox said she didn't need to pretend she didn't understand anything, because she ran to her friend's office every day. He stated that he had convinced her, almost grinning like crazy from behind. She was surprised that he had actually spoken to his sister. The young man only put glasses on her, but did not answer. After a few minutes, he wondered if they could just live comfortably now. He knew how she felt. He understood that she had gone too far, and so he assumed what was in her heart. He understood perfectly well why Autumn had died for him too, because he, like no one else, knew how it all ended. But he couldn't tell her. He understood that if she knew the whole truth, she wouldn't be able to live comfortably. Then he asked if she could let go of her Autumn. He understood that otherwise she would continue to chase after him with revenge. For this reason, he wanted her to give up everything. He knew that they had already achieved everything they wanted, so they could live a comfortable life for the rest of their days. He said that they should stop digging, because revenge was all pathetic nonsense. She asked with bewilderment why he always called it pathetic. She didn't understand how he could say something like that when he knew perfectly well what she felt. She didn't do that to look good in the eyes. Looking at her brother, she stated that she could not settle down. It was for this reason that he sat down to let her go of everything. At that very moment, he caught her with a fierce grin and asked why she didn't listen to him, since he was her younger brother. Gray was just trying to bring his girlfriend an umbrella, but he came across a very interesting picture. He was looking at the young people from afar. So interested was he in what they were talking about. He glared at them, as he could see that she truly couldn't allow herself to take her eyes off him for even a second. Knox looked at her intently and asked if he was not her younger brother. She was puzzled and did not understand why he would say such things. He was very worried about her, so besides wondering who gave her this personality in the first place, he didn't know if she was sure it was safe. He wondered if she was sure she didn't have any weaknesses they could use against her. He knew the weak points better than anyone. He knew better than anyone how terrible this family was. He knew that making someone like her disappear without a trace would mean nothing to them. But now he understood that he could protect her. But then he couldn't stand it and said that if it suited her, they could take revenge together. He said that they would burn this family to the ground. He said that he would take on the older brother, and she the younger. Apparently, it was just necessary to manipulate Scott. Then he said that she should simply seduce the young master. Adele was shocked by his words and did not understand what nonsense he was talking about. He said that she knew perfectly well what was being discussed, because rumors had already spread that the young master had paid for his beloved assistant or was in love with her so she could simply seduce him. The young lady was truly shocked by his statement. He stated that he knew perfectly well that the young gentleman despised women, but he kept her close to him. For this reason, he wanted something from her. She could not stand it, and at that very moment hit him in the face so that he would come to his senses. She screamed furiously that he must come to his senses. At that time, he stood there in a daze. She screamed that he was talking nonsense. At that very moment, he sighed heavily and declared that she should forget what he had said, because he had spoken nonsense. Knox looked closely at his snake sister and declared that she was smart enough to handle this. Then a young gentleman approached them and greeted them. He said that he brought an umbrella for his girlfriend, but it was a very interesting sight. Gray looked closely at the young man and asked what he was doing, in secret and alone with the lady. Adele quickly stated that they had been talking about the costs of maritime associations. Gray asked in surprise if she had reported tariff matters to the chief secretary for nobility. Knox sighed and stated that he had personally asked her to do so. He stated that in their day, court cases were diverted in different directions by each other thanks to the young lady. Gray didn't dwell on the matter, but he did notice that the young man was completely wet. At that moment, he turned his gaze to the lady and threw off the fact that nothing had actually happened between them. Adele was taken aback for a moment, not knowing what to answer, but when she came to her senses, she stated that nothing had happened. Gray sighed and said that he would just assume that he had misunderstood. But still, standing together in the rain was too much. He stated that she was too busy. Looking at her boss, Adele stated that he was right and she had little free time. A moment later, she said she had to go back. At the same time, she gave him the umbrella, without stating that she would use the umbrella that Lord Gray had brought her. Knox stared after his sister, but he knew she really didn't know anything. The young lady knew that it would be fine if she just went somewhere far away, but at the same time she wondered why such a situation had happened at all, just minutes after they left the estate.